Joey Sue, welcome to Conflict Zone.
My pleasure.
If it's wrong for the Hong Kong police to use violence, why is it right for the demonstrators to use it?
Well, first of all, I don't think the level of violence used by the protesters are based on the intention to attack anybody. I believe the intention of using violence is only to protect ourselves, because seeing that the police had been beating up protesters without a reason when the police
So you're saying they retaliate?
Yes.
But they do more than retaliate, don't they? October 20th, we had a group of hardcore
Yes.
protesters throwing petrol bombs at a station, police station. That wasn't retaliation. A week earlier, one protester stabbed a policeman with a box cutter. We had a homemade bomb which went off on the roadside, which by the grace of God didn't hurt anybody or kill anybody. It's that kind of violence I'm talking about.
Well,
What's the justification?
Well, I believe the justification is because when protesters realize that peaceful demonstrations and marches are no longer useful in calling the government to respond to the demands, I believe that is the reason why they're trying to use violence to express their anger, express their furious against the police force.
But this is random violence we're talking about, random violence.
Yes, and I agree that in all means we should try to use peaceful means to cover the response for the government, and I believe the usage of violence would not be the resolution of forcing the government to respond to our demands.
So you're saying the people who use violence are now out of control?
Well, I don't believe they're out of control because...
Well, one of your fellow protesters talked to the London Financial Times last month. He's called Mark. He's 17 years old. He said, I feel like we can't restrain ourselves anymore. The hatred towards the police is growing stronger and stronger. Can't restrain ourselves. That sounds very much like someone and a movement which is getting out of control.
I believe that it's only some individual cases. I believe on a common ground that most of the protesters are still doing things based on a reason. For example, like they vandalize MTR stations, they vandalize those restaurants or other shops that are related to Chinese-funded companies because
we'll come on to that a bit later. I want to talk to you about the measures you use. But some of your leading figures are worried by the violence, aren't they? Johnson Young, who was an organizer of the 2014 Umbrella Movement, he said every stakeholder should take action immediately if we don't want the violence to escalate to a point where there's no turning back. But why don't you stand up and say, enough with the violence?
Well, I believe one of the principles among the protesters is about no splitting and no condemning any of our protesters, even though the level of violence they use seems to be like escalating and might be posing some harms to the others.
So you maintain almost Chinese Communist Party unity. That's vital for you, is it?
I think
nobody can
different.
argue, nobody can talk, nobody can dispute.
Well, we do argue and we do discuss about our actions, and even after those vandalizations, we've got some discussions online on the online forums about, and we did reflections on our actions. So I believe there are...
But the violence still goes on. Who can stop it? Who can order it to stop?
Well, I believe nobody can try to stop it unless...
Nobody. So it's out of control then if nobody can stop it.
Unless when the younger generations and together they're willing to stand up together with the older generations, for example, like student leaders together with some significant leaders from the pro-democracy side. When these leaders try to stand up together and say, now we have to do something peaceful and to stop the violence, I believe that might be a way to stop the violence. And another thing
that sounds pretty tentative. That sounds pretty tentative, pretty difficult. Once the train is rolling, nobody, it seems, in your group can stop it. That's dangerous, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. So that's why we had been organizing peaceful marches and rallies to try to switch the tactics that we are using on protesting to call for the government to respond to our demands. And I believe everybody in the society had been working very hard. For example, like we are organizing general strikes. We had been organizing class boycotting campaigns because we would like to try to explore other peaceful means so that we do not have to use violence.
If in the meantime you should, God forbid, kill anybody, an innocent passerby or a policeman, your movement's finished then, isn't it? Your international support will evaporate overnight.
Yes, I agree.
And
I
you're
agree.
prepared to take that risk? And you won't come out in public and say, we need to stop this. The British government has slammed, last week, has slammed what it called a hardcore minority, said the violence was unacceptable. This is the sound of your international support wavering and leaving you, isn't it?
Yes, well, I believe the escalation of violence and those violent scenes would definitely be very concerning to the international society when all the free world countries are advocating using peaceful means to bring the situation to a result.
But they're telling you you've gone too far already. Doesn't that matter?
Well, of course that matters, but I think the most important thing is about how can we hold our government accountable and how can we bring them to respond to our demands.
What about the judiciary? You've had criticism from judicial institutions in Hong Kong, pretty heavy criticism. These are the bodies that enjoy considerable respect around the world for their impartiality. Again, if you're losing them, this is a really bad sign for you. The Law Society, for instance, said all forms of unlawful violence, particularly against the police, the use of petrol bombs against the police, as well as the apparent attacks on the families of police officers and bullying of their children at school. Do you approve of those methods? Bullying the children of police officers at school?
Well, I don't agree with those methods, but still we stick to a principle of no splitting.
So you don't agree with the violence and you don't agree with the bullying of the children. Doesn't sound as though there's much you agree with, but you'll stay silent anyway.
No, we had been advocating using peaceful means, for example, like peaceful rallies, marches to express our concerns and demands. But the point is that we do not publicly condemn those actions, but still we try to use our peaceful means, to use our own peaceful means to try to switch the tactics.
And yet others are using intimidation, mafia-style intimidation. We have a report of one teenage daughter of an officer being harassed by an adult while she was playing sport. They said to her, what your father is doing is disgusting. Since when are children responsible for the actions of their parents?
Well, first of all, I don't think any family members of those police officers should be responsible for their own disgusting actions. And I think
but you're making them responsible. Some of your people are making them responsible, bullying them, harassing them.
Well, I believe that is happening, but
Well, the Law Society says it's happening. They accuse you of it.
Yes, I can't deny that it is actually happening, but still we're trying to use peaceful tactics to bring the situation to a resolution. And I believe like bullying family members would not be a very good way to solve the situation.
The Hong Kong Bar Association said your attack on the Hong Kong airport constituted serious obstruction and was in open defiance of injunctions granted by the courts. In other words, you broke the law. Do you want to live in a state governed by the rule of law or only the laws that you like?
Of course, I would like to live in a state of rule of law. However, we can see that it is very obvious that the situation of rule of law in Hong Kong is being broken, not by the protesters, but by the government itself first. And I believe that's why protesters are marching on the street, are taking onto the streets, even though they know that it will break the law. And I believe
but your
it is the
activists are saying, that their most important aim is to fight to protect the rule of law in Hong Kong and judicial independence. But you're trashing it at the same time.
Well, I believe...
You're breaking the law to protect the law? Doesn't add up, does it?
Well, it is the government that forces us to take on the streets and to break the laws. It is not the protesters' intention to break the law.
Nobody forces you to break the law, do they?
The government forces us to do so, I believe.
That's your interpretation. But here are these judicial institutions warning you that criminal contempt, as they put it, impedes the administration of justice and, if unchecked, will inflict grave and irreparable damage to the rule of law in Hong Kong. Grave and irreparable damage. That's what they think you're doing to Hong Kong. Doesn't that matter?
Well, of course that matters, but as I have mentioned, what matters the most is about whether we can actually bring a change to our political structure and our government structure. And that would be the common goal and would be the most important goal for us to achieve for this, at this moment. And I believe even for the Department of Justice itself isn't being totally independent for now. After the hangover of Hong Kong from the British government to the Chinese government, we can see that our core values are judicial systems being encroached by the Chinese government. We can see from the recent prosecutions that the Department of Justice is only prosecuting and putting those protesters on court while they're...
But you still have independent judges. You still have independent courts.
Well, in terms of system, they are independent. However, we can see that they're actually being very heavily influenced by the Chinese government, that they're sidestepping these cases of, for example, like the 21st July Yun Long cases. They're not prosecuting, they're not taking any of the trials to the court, while they had been political prosecuting so many of the protesters.
Okay,